The air catches. It holds its breath. There's a cold metal taste in my mouth, like old pennies. Not mine, not his, but the taste of something entirely alien slicing through the familiar. The silence in the driveway isn't quiet. It's screaming. It's the high, thin scream of polished chrome under a harsh sun, the heavy thud of official boots on expensive gravel, the rustle of legal documents crisp and cold as winter leaves. He stands there, frozen, eyes wide and bloodshot, hands outstretched uselessly towards the vehicles that are no longer vehicles. They are simply evidence now. Steel and glass monuments to his lies, his incredible, breathtaking lies. And the men in the dark, unassuming suits, they just keep going, systematic, quiet, placing stickers that burn brighter than any paint job. Stickers that say, seized. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before felt solid. Like a good, well-built house. Foundations deep, walls strong. Roof keeping the weather out. Predictable. Comfortable. I had routines that felt like warm blankets. Waking up to the same slant of light, the same quiet rhythm of a shared home. My husband, Mark, was, well, Mark. The man I built a life with, shared a bed with, planned futures with. He had his quirks, sure, everyone does. A little too absorbed in his work, sometimes a little distant. But nothing that felt like a crack in the foundation. It felt like normal, everyday wear and tear. We had comfortable dinners, went through the motions of couplehood, shared the occasional laugh, the occasional silence. It was a life measured in small moments, the way he liked his coffee, the sound of his key in the lock, the easy assumption of US. It wasn't fireworks every day, but it was safe. Secure. My family built that security in a way, not intentionally, not to buy my happiness, but through generations of careful stewardship. The trust had been in my family for over 100 years. A quiet legacy, managed by a succession of trustees, designed to provide a safety net, educational opportunities for descendants, a quiet bedrock of stability. My father had added to it, managed it wisely. When he passed, it shifted. The primary trustee remained a distant cousin, a sharp, old-school lawyer, but the disbursements, the managing of assets designated for my branch of the family, that fell under a different set of rules. Rules that, innocently, blindly, I had given Mark access to after we married. Joint accounts, shared financial views, the naive belief that everything was ours. It wasn't about inheriting wealth. It was about inheriting responsibility, a legacy I felt honored to protect. It was never meant to be a slush fund. It was a promise across time. The first sign wasn't a bang. It was a whisper. A tiny, almost imperceptible wrong note in the melody of our life. It started with the bank statements. Not ours, not the joint ones I saw every day. These were statements for an account I barely looked at, linked tangentially to the family trust's management structure. An account I'd given Mark signing authority on years ago, when his business was just starting, just in case, a gesture of wifely support. I usually filed them without a second thought. They were dull, filled with legal jargon and small transfers related to managing family properties, dividends reinvested. But one month, a large sum stood out. A wire transfer, outgoing, to a name I didn't recognize. A dealership name. A luxury car dealership. My brain stuttered. Mark hadn't mentioned buying a car. He loved his old, reliable sedan. He joked about driving it until the wheels fell off. I shook it off. A business expense, maybe? He had clients, sometimes complex deals. I told myself I was being silly. Suspicious wives were a cliché I refused to embody. But the whisper lingered. Then came another statement the next month. Another wire transfer. Another dealership. Different name, same luxury vibe. My stomach tightened. This wasn't random. This was a pattern. A pattern I couldn't explain with business expenses. He wasn't a car collector. We weren't in the market for a new car. 2 luxury cars? In 2 months? The house started to feel less solid. The walls seemed thinner, letting in a draft of unease. I started looking closer.
Quietly, casually.
I'd wait until he was in the shower or late at the office and pull out the file box. My hands trembled slightly as I sorted through the trust statements, the linked accounts, the old tax forms. It was like digging through layers of sediment, uncovering strange, unsettling fossils. More wire transfers. Not every month, but sporadic, always large, always to different luxury dealerships scattered across different states. It wasn't just cars. There were transfers to high-end boutiques, exotic travel agencies, expensive jewelry stores. And always, the names receiving the money were not companies I recognized from his work. They weren't suppliers, partners, or clients. They were names associated with things. Expensive, unnecessary things. The knot in my stomach tightened into a hard, cold stone. I felt physically ill. My sleep became restless, filled with fragmented images of spreadsheets and luxury car logos. I'd watch him across the dinner table, the man I thought I knew, and see a stranger. His smile felt artificial. His casual comments about his day felt like carefully constructed diversions. The silence between us, once comfortable, now felt heavy, filled with the unspoken, the unspeakable. I started cross-referencing the dates, the amounts, trying to find a pattern beyond the obvious outflow of my family's money. And then I found the name. Tucked away in a string of text on one of the wire confirmations, a reference number followed by initials. I typed the initials into a search engine, then added the name of one of the dealerships. The internet is a vast, unforgiving ocean. And sometimes, it washes up the most horrifying things onto your shore. Social media profiles. Pictures. Her name was Elena. And there she was, draped over the hood of a brand new, blindingly red sports car. Another picture, posing in front of a sleek black SUV. Another, a vintage convertible. Hashtags boasting about new wheels, blessed, living my best life, and in the comments, veiled references, heart emojis, and a comment from Mark's burner account, an account I hadn't known existed until I saw the profile picture, a blurry photo of him looking away from the camera. The world tilted. The ground fell away. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just betrayal. It was spectacle. He wasn't just funding a secret life. He was funding a public display of it. Using my family's history, my family's security, the legacy built by people I loved, to buy toys for another woman. The cars weren't just cars. They were middle fingers pointed directly at my face. Each luxury vehicle a scream of his contempt, his disregard, his breathtaking arrogance. My body went cold. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. I didn't confront him.
Not yet.
The initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating fury. A feeling I hadn't known I possessed. It wasn't a hot, burning rage. It was something sharper, quieter, infinitely more dangerous. It was the clarity that comes when everything you believed is shattered, leaving only the hard, sharp edges of truth. I realized I wasn't just angry. I was violated. He hadn't just broken his vase. He had desecrated something sacred, something that wasn't just mine but belonged to generations. I needed proof. Not just enough to break my heart, but enough to break him. Enough to ensure that this wasn't just a messy divorce, a division of assets. This was theft. Embezzlement. A criminal act cloaked in marital privilege. I became a ghost in my own house.
Silent.
Observant. I hired a private investigator. Discreet. I gave him the names of the dealerships, the dates of the wire transfers, Elena's name, Mark's burner account. I needed addresses. VIN numbers. Proof of ownership. Proof that he paid for them. The investigator was good. Quiet, efficient. He confirmed the VINs, the registered owner, Elena, of course, and, most importantly, the source of the funds matching the dates and amounts from the trust-linked account. He found more accounts, more transfers, a sprawling web of financial deception designed to keep his mistress living in vulgar, conspicuous luxury, all on my family's dime. Every piece of evidence was another stab. Discovering he'd set up shell companies, complex transfers designed to obscure the trail. Watching him leave for business trips that coincided perfectly with Elena's social media posts from exotic locations. The casual way he'd lie about working late, while I knew he was likely with her. It was like watching a slow-motion film of my life being dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. The pain was a constant, dull throb, overlaid with the sharp spikes of fresh discovery. But beneath the pain, the cold resolve hardened. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. This was about justice. Not just for me, but for the legacy he defiled. I wouldn't just divorce him. I would expose him. I would dismantle his life the way he had dismantled mine. The more I dug, the clearer the strategy became. The family trust wasn't just old money. It had specific clauses, legal structures designed for protection. It wasn't his money, to begin with. His accessing it, diverting it for personal use, let alone for a mistress and her car collection, was a profound violation of fiduciary duty, not just marital trust. The trust had its own legal counsel, the same distant cousin who was the primary trustee. I called him. It was one of the hardest calls I ever made, explaining, haltingly at first, then with growing certainty, what I had found. The silence on the other end was heavy, broken only by his sharp intake of breath. He knew the trust law intimately. He understood the gravity of what Mark had done. This wasn't just a husband cheating. This was theft on a grand scale, from a protected entity. He immediately brought in a team of forensic accountants and lawyers specializing in trust law and white-collar crime. The investigation expanded beyond just the cars and the travel. They looked at Mark's business, his investments, every financial transaction he'd made since marrying me. They found more. Layers of hidden accounts, assets siphoned off, not just from the trust, but using the trust funds to prop up failing ventures or acquire things he simply wanted, disguised as business expenses. The car collection was just the most visible, most vulgar tip of a very large, very rotten iceberg. The legal team was meticulous, quietly gathering evidence, building a case. They explained the options. Divorce was one path, but it felt inadequate. It would be a long, messy fight over assets he'd already hidden, over money that was never his to begin with. Criminal charges were possible, but complex, relying on proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt. But the trust offered a unique avenue. The misuse of trust funds, especially funds designated for specific purposes, which included preserving principal for future generations, wasn't just civil theft. It had tax implications. Significant tax implications. The money wasn't earned income. It wasn't a gift in the traditional sense. It was a complex web of distributions and investments within a protected structure. Diverting it, not reporting it, using it for personal gain through shell companies and undeclared transfers, that was the IRS's domain. Tax evasion.
Fraud.
And the IRS, I learned, is a relentless, soulless machine when it comes to collecting what it believes it's owed. My legal team, working with the trust's lawyers, built a case not just against Mark, but against the money. They traced every single dollar, every single transfer, showing where it originated, the trust, where it went, Mark's hidden accounts, shell companies, and where it ended up, Elena, the cars, the luxury. They highlighted the lack of reporting, the clear intent to deceive. They packaged it, cold and clinical, and presented it to the relevant authorities. Not just the IRS, but financial crimes divisions. The silence from that point on was excruciating. I lived a double life. At home, the dutiful, if somewhat withdrawn, wife. I went through the motions.
Cooked dinner.
Watched television. Listened to his casual lies with a poker face that would rival a professional. Inside, I was a tightly wound spring, vibrating with tension. Waiting. The legal team told me it would take time. Bureaucracy moved slowly, but surely. Investigations had to be opened. Evidence verified. Procedures followed. But once the machine started moving, it was hard to stop. I remember sitting in the large, oak-paneled office of the lead attorney handling the financial crimes aspect. He was older, with weary eyes and a sharp mind. He looked at me across the desk, the piles of binders between us thick with the documented wreckage of my marriage. He didn't just steal your money, the attorney said, his voice low. He stole from the trust. That has implications beyond your personal finances. It impacts the beneficiaries, the legal standing of the trust itself. What he did was aggressive. Stupid, ultimately, but aggressive. I asked about the cars. Were they recoverable? Could the money be traced back? The attorney gave a thin smile. Luxury assets bought with undeclared, potentially fraudulent funds? The IRS takes a very dim view of that, especially when they can trace the money trail so clearly back to a source that wasn't the individual claiming ownership and wasn't reported as income by the individual receiving the goods. He paused. Let's just say the IRS has very efficient ways of correcting tax discrepancies. The decision was made. We wouldn't file for divorce immediately. We wouldn't confront him with the infidelity. We would let the financial investigation run its course. We would let the authorities build their case based on the tax fraud and embezzlement from the trust. His downfall wouldn't be about cheating on his wife. It would be about stealing from a protected entity and evading taxes. That was a far more powerful weapon. It removed the emotional, messy, she said, of divorce and affair, and replaced it with cold, hard numbers, illegal transactions, and government power. I still lived in the same house as him, slept in the same bed, separated by an emotional chasm wider than the Grand Canyon. Every interaction felt like a performance. My heart hammered in my chest every time the doorbell rang, every time the phone rang. Was it them? Was today the day? The waiting became its own form of torture. The silence stretched into weeks, then months. Mark seemed oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant. He continued his routine, his lies, his secret life. Elena's social media feed, which I compulsively, agonizingly checked through a burner account of my own, continued to display her extravagant lifestyle, the parade of luxury cars. Each post was a fresh twist of the knife, a reminder of what he had done, of what I was waiting for. During this time, my own strategy solidified. This wasn't just about punishing Mark. It was about reclaiming my life, my future, the integrity of my family's legacy. The legal team helped me put protective measures in place regarding my own assets, my own income, ensuring that when the storm hit, I would be standing on solid ground. The trust lawyers worked on reinforcing the trust's defenses, ensuring no more funds could be diverted, and preparing for the legal battle to recover the stolen funds. The day came without fanfare. It was a Tuesday morning. Bright sun, birds singing. A perfectly ordinary day shattered by the arrival of several unmarked cars pulling into the driveway. Men in dark suits. Not police uniforms, but the crisp, anonymous attire of federal agents. They didn't have sirens. They didn't make a fuss. They simply walked up the driveway, purposeful, determined. Mark was home. He had taken a rare morning off. He was in the kitchen, making coffee, whistling some tuneless tune. I was sitting at the table, pretending to read the newspaper, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I knew, the moment I saw the cars, who they were. The waiting was over. The trap was sprung. He saw them too, through the kitchen window. His whistling stopped abruptly. His face, moments before relaxed and cheerful, drained of all color. He looked confused, then wary, then something close to panic flickered in his eyes. He didn't move. He just stared as they approached the front door. When they rang the doorbell, I didn't move either. I just watched him. His eyes darted to mine questioningly. But there was no question I would answer. I had called my lawyer the moment I saw the cars. He simply said, "It's happening. Do not interfere. Do not speak to anyone without me present. Let them do their job." Mark went to the door. He opened it hesitantly. The agents were polite but firm. They showed him identification. Explained they were from the IRS, accompanied by agents from another federal agency. They mentioned financial crimes. They had warrants. Warrants for search and seizure, related to an ongoing investigation into tax fraud and the misuse of funds. His confusion was rapidly replaced by a dawning horror. He started to stammer, asking questions, demanding to know what this was about. The agents were calm, robotic. They weren't interested in his explanations or his panic. They had a job to do. They asked him to step aside. One agent stayed with him, quietly informing him of his rights, advising him he should contact legal counsel immediately. Other agents entered the house, moving with quiet efficiency. They weren't interested in our personal belongings. They went straight to his office, to filing cabinets, to computers. They were looking for financial records. And then they mentioned the cars. The warrants included specific vehicles, located at specific addresses. Mark's face went ashen. He started talking louder, his voice rising. The cars? What about the cars? They're not mine. You can't just. The agents were unmoved. They had the VIN numbers. They had the evidence of the money trail. They knew exactly where the cars were registered, and they knew who had ultimately paid for them and how that money was acquired and moved. One agent stepped outside, speaking into a radio. A few minutes later, more vehicles arrived. Not unmarked sedans this time. Tow trucks. Large, flatbed tow trucks. They drove past our house, heading down the street, towards Elena's address. Mark seemed to understand then. The full, devastating scope of what was happening. His voice escalated from panicked questions to desperate shouts. He started following the agent who had remained inside, pleading, denying, threatening. He became frantic. He rushed to the front window, staring down the street after the tow trucks. He saw them arrive at Elena's house. Saw the agents already there. Saw the tow truck drivers preparing to winch the first car onto the flatbed. It was the red sports car. Elena's pride and joy. The one he'd bought with the first large wire transfer. His face contorted. Rage, disbelief, sheer, unadulterated panic. He turned from the window, his eyes wild, searching for me. He saw me sitting there, calm, watching him, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. You, he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. You did this. You called them. You bitch. How could you? They're seizing everything. He started yelling, pacing the floor, running his hands through his hair. The agents watched him with impassivity. They had seen it before. The unraveling. Then he saw the second tow truck hook up the sleek black SUV, and the third one positioning itself near the vintage convertible. 3 tow trucks. 3 luxury cars. All bought with money stolen from the trust, money he never declared, never earned. Seized by the federal government.
Gone. Just like that.
He let out a roar, a guttural sound of pure, animalistic fury and despair. He wasn't screaming about his business or his freedom or even me. He was screaming about the cars.
About the toys.
About the symbols of his secret life being systematically stripped away in the most public, humiliating way possible. They're not mine, he screamed again, though his voice was breaking now. They're hers. Elena's. You can't take her cars. An agent, quiet until now, spoke calmly. Mr. Hayes, our investigation indicates these vehicles were purchased with funds derived from illicit activities and potential tax evasion. Regardless of registered ownership, assets purchased with such funds are subject to seizure as part of the recovery process. He didn't hear him.
He was too far gone.
He sank to his knees, right there in the living room, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking. He wasn't crying, he was making choked, gasping sounds. Like a child whose favorite toy has been snatched away. The man who had systematically stolen from my family, lied to me, built an entire second life on a foundation of deceit, was broken by the sight of luxury cars being towed away. It was pathetic. It was also, I admit, deeply, icily satisfying. The agents continued their work, oblivious to his breakdown. They collected boxes of documents, removed hard drives, methodically went through everything related to his finances. They weren't just taking the cars, they were taking the evidence of everything else he had done. Elena arrived sometime later, drawn by the commotion, the tow trucks, the agents. She pulled up in a small, modest car I didn't recognize. She stood at the edge of the driveway, looking bewildered, then horrified as she saw the scene. The agents ignoring her. Mark on his knees. The tow trucks pulling away with her cars. She started shouting too, demanding to know what was happening. An agent calmly explained the situation to her. 2. mentioned assets traceable to fraud and seizure warrants. Her face crumpled. She looked from the departing tow trucks to Mark, then to me, sitting calmly inside, watching the spectacle. Her confusion turned to fury directed at me. She didn't scream. Her voice was a low, venomous hiss from the driveway. "You did this. You ruined everything." I met her gaze. I felt nothing. No anger, no triumph, just a vast emptiness where my heart used to be, now replaced by a quiet, resolute strength. They had both underestimated me. They had seen me as the naive wife, the source of the money, easily duped. They hadn't seen the steel beneath the surface, the protector of a legacy, the quiet architect of their undoing. The hours blurred. The agents finished their search, tagged everything they took, and left as quietly as they arrived, leaving behind a house that felt strangely empty and a man who was utterly, completely broken. Mark remained on the floor for a long time. When he finally got up, he didn't look at me. He stumbled towards the stairs, a ruined figure. The days that followed were a surreal landscape of silence and legal action. He was facing serious charges, not just tax evasion, but wire fraud, potentially even charges related to the misuse of trust funds. The full weight of the federal government was bearing down on him. His carefully constructed world had imploded. His business was under scrutiny, his assets were frozen, his reputation was in tatters. The luxury cars, the symbols of his success and his infidelity, were gone, likely to be auctioned off by the government to recoup lost taxes and penalties. Elena, I heard through the legal grapevine, was questioned extensively and was likely facing her own legal headaches related to receiving assets bought with illicit funds. Their relationship, built on stolen money and deceit, evaporated under the harsh light of federal investigation. The divorce was swift and, for me, surprisingly clean. With the evidence the authorities had gathered, with his finances in ruins and facing criminal prosecution, Mark had no leverage. He agreed to everything, giving up any claim to our home, to my assets, to anything connected to the trust. He was more concerned with negotiating a plea deal to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Winning felt hollow. The house was quiet, too quiet. The space where he had been felt vast and empty. The betrayal had left a scar, deep and permanent. I had protected my family's legacy. I had ensured he faced consequences far greater than a simple divorce. I had turned his weapon, my trust funds, his mistress's cars, into the instrument of his destruction. But the cost had been immense. The loss of innocence, the shattering of trust, the cold realization of the capacity for deceit in someone you thought you knew. I stood in the empty driveway where the tow trucks had been. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. It looked ordinary, but I knew what had happened here. The quiet, devastating power of evidence, patience, and leverage. He had thought he was untouchable, using my family's trust as his personal bank, flaunting his stolen life. He never considered that the very structure he was exploiting could be turned against him. He never considered that the IRS, the most formidable debt collector in the world, would be my unlikely, unwitting ally. It wasn't the screaming that stayed with me. It was the silence after. The quiet efficiency of justice, federal style. The way everything he valued most was reduced to seized property, cataloged and carted away. He thought he could steal my past and my future. But he just ended up losing his present, one luxury car at a time. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.